people go very much on the game and they look at the game and they look at the stats, but it's a bigger process when you're taking things into consideration. And actually, I view having a mistake and then going and getting back on the ball and trying to keep making the mistake, that's a really strong quality.
Welcome to this episode of the Real Sideline Expert, where I am joined by Sally Needham. Hi, Sally.
Hi, Marcia. Lovely to be here.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you. So I just want to sort of tell our listeners, our members on the platform, that you are a human development, performance and culture consultant.
Yes, I am.
That's a mouthful, but can you just actually tell us what that means?
Yeah, it's well, my job role that I was previously in a club, we kind of formulated that title and it's kind of stayed with us. But for me, it's around understanding the human. So I work and look after neuroscience and use that in the football world, outside the football world as well. And it's really around understanding how you as a human can develop as a person first, and then how then that impacts on performance and how you can use some of the neuroscience for performance as well. And then also how we embed that culture in a organization, in a team, in a workplace. And I think the culture bit is probably an interesting bit in the sense of my lens is very much around changing the lens a little bit on human behaviour, how we use certain language, how we foster and understand what's happening in our body and our brain. And so the culture bit is really around shining a light on something different, and then trying to reinforce that a little bit through connections, through relationships, through conversations, to try to influence, especially in the football world, where we are probably in an ecosystem, and you've got a lot of males in that have been in it before, and sometimes we just repeat things, and now we need to look at actually what's difference in probably our boys, girls coming through the system. So long-winded message answer, but it really is around how we use neuroscience to really understand the human, how that links into performance, and then how do we then kind of embed it around. So the fact of it's a pronged approach, and we're all singing off the same hymn sheet to help our young people, our performers, be develop as people and as obviously as players.
Amazing. Thanks, Sally. And we're going to get into the weeds of how parents can practically help themselves and help their kids on their journey in youth football. Just to explain as well, because you are a UEFA A licensed coach, and you've had you did the Advanced Youth Award as well. Can you explain both of those in terms, especially the Youth Award, because I think that's quite crucial in terms of the football world and young people, isn't it?
Yeah, I were very fortunate that so I worked at the FA for 13 years, and I was part of what was called the FA Skills Programme, and it will basically work with 5 to 11-year-olds. And a unique programme, so Trevor Brooking brought it in, and they just started doing the Youth Awards, so the coaching courses, and they piloted the FA Youth Award, the final one that's similar. It's on the same framework as the UEFA race, so it's a level 4 qualification. And I was very fortunate to be picked as one of on the pilot, and I did the 5 to 11s, and it was a game changer for me in a sense of my understanding about people, children. It really evoked my curiosity around the psych and social corners. And the course, basically, you did a core block, and then you did every corner, so psych, social, physical, technical, and it was purposely built like that. So the fact of you really understood that psych and social are really key for like for anything within the technical or the physical, and you got delivered sessions that helped as a coach to understand it. It was the first one really that as coaching you got to understand how to influence and how to develop social skills, but also confidence, commitment, the 5C stuff. And I was working in the skills program, like I said, so I went and delivered it. The course, and the children just seem to flourish as children. They seem to flourish as footballers. Obviously, they're not professional at that little age, but as in playing the football. And it really evoked loads of curiosity around, well, why is this? So why is doing this session, why does it develop this? Where does it come from? Why are the kids blossoming as people and as children and as players? And so it really started the catalyst for them going on to do other courses to really look at the neuroscience. For me, it were a game changer. The youth awards at the FA were game changers. They had Youth Award 1, 2, and 3, and then obviously the FA Advanced. And I think it still is a major flagship and a qualification that you will hear a lot of coaches said that it's the best qualification they've done, or it really does open your eyes and they bring specialist people in. So yeah, it was the first time I'd really been exposed to psychosocial, but realistically made me realise how important relationships, behaviours, language, everything was in developing people and players.
That's really fascinating, Sally. So when you talk about those development aspects and sort of breaking it down into, what the kids are learning practically, can you give us some examples of what this sort of work helps the young people in football specifically do?
Yeah, I think it were a big how do I word it? It were a big process. So they talked around like arrival activities, for example. So what's arrival activity that you're gonna put in? So my favourite were always soccer tennis. So they used to come and do like soccer football for an arrival activity. And that were around like footballing connections. Then I started to realise, well, they engaged in the sessions better. So why is that? And then because then in my training after, I start to now know the science behind arrival activities. We know that behaviour goes down, learning goes up, 10 to 15 minutes of an activity. I now know the neuroscience behind it. The kids got different social interactions. If they had a wet play time, they needed their body to stimulate because they need play. It also gives you a chance to just down regulate if you've been rushing or if there were loads of things, because we know now that obviously we can help support each other's nervous system and there's that co-regulation and self-regulation thing going on. The sessions in like how I was in my language around asking him to try things. So I'm wondering if we can try this tonight. How do you feel with it? And that encouragement around understanding around the coach and knowing the player. And there were a big emphasis on before you can teach the football, you've got to understand the child. And it used to be talked about before you can teach Johnny or Jenny, you've got to really understand who Jenny and Johnny are, because that's then they're all so individual playing in a team sport. So the elements of how then you did like communication. So you had silent football, so they've got to use non-verbal communication, and your more dominant ones then can't speak. So it allows some of the less dominant in their verbal communication to really start to get on the ball a little bit more. Then you might have one person talking that you then go, oh, I wonder if you want to be our speaker tonight. And because they've had a good little session, then they might start communicating more. And so you built it all up, and it were really just, instead of just teaching the football, it were all the social, the psychological stuff that really was so key in relationships, in time, in how they manage themselves. So we had used to have this thing called the right. So everybody had the right to be safe, to learn, to have fun. And you always brought it back to that. So the children were having guidelines, and you'd put like pictures on them on the magnets, and you'd talk about the learning, and you'd have the time with them, and it was fascinating. So yeah, I don't know if I really answered your question, but it was just all the understanding of the football came kind of last. It was real the detailed planning around how you structure the sessions, how I was in my self-awareness, how you notice things in children, what triggered them, what were the behaviours, and it were all that side of it more than than the football. And the sessions, you know, we had really fun sessions that was very much around names that we gave them, like Great Escape, Skills Corridor. So you made it a lot of fun. But that kind of come the second nature thing. It was more about developing them as children and us as coaches as well. Like we laugh now, but that program and that education, that training, a lot who've come from the skills program have gone on to really now high profile jobs.
Wow.
Because I think it learned that we used to say it definitely made me a better auntie and a better sister and a better daughter. And they used to say it's made me a better father, a better coach. So, you know, it really was a real influencing in where my career's gone for definite.
Amazing. So Sally, where, like, how much of this is used across the board in football? Like, obviously you've worked at Sheffield United, and I
Yeah.
believe they use the programs there, and you're able to integrate some of that work into your coaching system.
Yeah.
Is that something which is across the board? Like, can you expect to go into every academy and get access to this type of development and support?
I would hope so, yes, in a sense of the youth award stuff, because you've got a lot of people that have transitioned from the FA into clubs, head of coaching programs. So the Premier League do a lot of programs, the FA. So if you're in an academy, then you normally you would access the Advanced Youth Award. When it comes to more a deeper level of the neuroscience, so obviously my work is the neuroscience, then no, it's a new field.
Mm,
Arsene Wenger thinks it's going to be a game changer, and that were a couple of years ago, and it's not really being transferred. So there's a little bit of work now popping up.
mm,
So FC Copenhagen are doing some really good work, but it's very cognitive neuroscience and testing, and how that then goes into their training program. Norwich have got a soccer bot,
mm,
but they're still trying to work out how that gets used. But my lens and the neuroscience that I look at is very much from behavioural and effective neuroscience, which is all about how your body and your brain works together, experiences, and also contemplative. So the use of contemplative tools, which we used to probably think were a little bit fluffy within breathwork, meditation, mindfulness, but now advancing science shows us the benefits. So Sheffield United, um, to be fair to him, I had a really forward-thinking academy manager in Jack Lester. So
mm,
Jack were really interested in it. And before I went to Sheffield, I'd been doing the work at the FA, but never been really applied. So when I left the FA, COVID hit, so it gave me a chance to take redundancy. I moved to Sheffield, but I was so fortunate the fact of Jack bought into it. I had four of the key stakeholders.
yeah.
So our under 21s manager, which at the time was Paul Eckenbottom, obviously went to first team. I got our under 18s manager, our head of goalkeeping, Jack. So I had real strong people that understood it, wanted to buy into it, thought there were value in it, and we embedded it. And before I went in, I said to Jack, you know, I'm not sure if it's going to work. I thought it would. Um, and I'm just finishing up my PhD now, which was around monitoring it and gathering all the data with it. Seems to do work,
Mhm.
thank God. But yeah, Jack were very, look, we're not gonna break them. We've got to do something a bit different. We can't compete with Man United, Man City.
Mm,
So we need to be the best coach developers, and neuroscience is fundamental to teaching and learning. It's fundamental to human development and performance.
mhm.
So yeah, so we rolled with it, and luckily, yeah. So you're coming back to your answer. No, really. At the minute, there's only Sheffield that has embedded it.
Okay. So tell me, let's go into a little bit of detail
Yeah,
about those age groups that you embedded at, like under 18s, under 21s. Um, what were some of the activities that were involved in that, and what were some of the results that you can link to those activities?
yeah. So be careful. I'm going to be careful not to use the names now. So when I first went in, I really thought I'd do a lot more work with the younger age during the foundation phase. And quite quickly, I transferred into the PDP a lot. My remit was the whole academy, staff and players. And that were key was in the education team. So I worked with our education team around understanding when players come in to education, what they sometimes need. So they were a part of really developing them as a person.
Mhm.
Then I'd go into the MDT team, and so it was embedded all the way through. The 18s and 21s, we started putting things in the program. So things in the program off the field. So we got a mindfulness room. In the mindfulness room, they had bean bags, they had a colouring in wall, they had books, they had games, blankets. We had little greenery scenery. So we had a lot of plants popping up everywhere. We changed our offices so that the fact of we got more greenery, we got more
Mm.
collaboration.
Okay.
But so the 18s and 21s had a mindfulness area. They had yoga in their program 3 times a week, but they also had individual work. So if I'm working with a player on emotional control, for example, he'd come in the morning, he'd come and do some breath work with me in the mindfulness room, and then he'd go into his individual session. And then I worked with a coach on what was his triggers, how he then noticed, the coach noticed when he was starting to tip, what some of the strategies we were working on so he could reinforce it. So the coach got the education around it. And then I might have done then some more purposeful work in the afternoon with that player around visualizing. So, for example, we had one player that we got some footage on that he kicked out, and we worked on how he felt before his action, how he felt in his body, where he felt it in his body, and then we did some visualization around changing his response to that stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we reinforced it and reinforced it. So the breath work was all around developing his, we call window of tolerance, his soil, his emotional resilience. But then we had a bit of the performance element as well of using, we know that your brain doesn't know you're thinking it or doing it. So visualization were really key, and we just really focused in on his behavior patterns changing, layering that. This then becomes the strongest behavior, and the old one doesn't get rid of, but it lays dormant. So this is his new way of behaving in his emotional control. So that's one example. We've done some work with goalkeepers with mics in the GPS, tracking their communication. We've taken singing lessons. Again, visualization on speaking and having communication, and they are then might have to present and do sessions with the little ones. So you're then stimulating them on presenting back. Well, probably a lot of that work is probably what people say, oh well, that normally gets done, and that's not neuroscience. But for us, it was an element of giving them the understanding of how their brain and their body operates. So it's always been giving them the why behind we do it, the science, then
Mm-hmm.
the tools, and then the support. And that was kind of my role. And then obviously working with the members of staff to get them to see things slightly differently, or get the buy into their approach, because I want around them all the time to reinforce, and then the keys of their behaviours, because they're the ones that then could influence, and how they behaved would then influence their body. So, for example, the player with the emotional control, if the coach started to get irate, it is starting to tip. So he's
Mm-hmm.
got to realise that he's enforcing or he's triggering some of the behaviours. So then how does he navigate that as well? So yeah, a lot of work went off, but uh, enjoyed it for definite.
Quite powerful. I want to dig into some of those sort of activities you talked about. Breath work, for
Mm.
example. Like what is breath work? Like we breathe every day. It's like how much work does it take? Like
Yeah, yeah. So I always say this, that your breath is your remote control of your body. So once you start to understand how we use nasal breathing and
Mhm.
how you can stimulate your vagus nerve, will then be dependent on your emotional resilience, basically. So we use, for example, off the field, we used very much a lot around box breathing. Some people call it square breathing, and it's your four and your four and your four. And this is shown to really stimulate your vagus nerve. The stronger your vagus nerve, the more emotional resilience you've got, which means you can make good decisions and keep composed in high pressure situations. And also, you've got more emotional resilience off the field to navigate through life, or an injury, or deselection, or an argument with your other half. So, there's some stuff that we do off the pitch that really stimulates our vagus nerve, but then on it, we use a lot of what's called a physiological sigh, and we use that for in-game moments, um, free kicks, goal kicks, penalties. And the more that the boys understand the different types of breath work. So when we had cold water pods. So when they used to go in the cold water, it's a different breath work. When some of them were playing a team that wasn't as strong as like a local derby, and they felt too calm, we had a up-regulating breath that they did. So we've got a lot of, and the boys, we talked to them a lot about nasal breathing. So a lot of in society now don't breathe right, and it massively links to sleep. So nasal breathing is brilliant because you've got airs in your nose that starts your immune system better. You get more carbon dioxide out, which is better for recovery, and you sleep better, which we know is massive for performance. So we used to do a lot of that. Some of the boys used to tape the mouths when they were doing a little bit of a bike, just to reinforce this nasal breathing work. And yeah, it's funny because we played a game, and the opposition coach got quite irate and started losing a little bit of emotional control. And one of the boys went, "You need to go see Sally to do some breath work." So it was, and I think that's kind of the culture bit. So it were really key that the staff knew about the breath work,
Yeah.
knew that they'd go into the mindfulness room and down regulate. We know that realistically we've got an accelerator and a brake in our nervous system. And the more that this works really efficiently together, we have more efficiency. It's like in your car. If you're always putting on the accelerator, you're going to use too much petrol. So that were kind of where the culture bit a lot came in. That it was talked around, and it was normal, and we got to a point where it wasn't he's doing this, or we changed a lot of language on sleep. Like if you're sleeping less than 7 hours, it were like, you really need to work that on that. We had a big sleep project that went off, so we started to change the narrative around some of the things that people would probably call fluffy or soft, and the coaches and the staff were really key in having to reinforce this, that they bought into it, because it's so pivotal for them as a human being on and off the field in a sport that is high pressured, that they're going through GCSEs, starting to learn to drive. They might be going into the first team. They might go out on loan, or they get unfortunate. You're not right for this club, and they have to then go navigate coming away from being a footballer with an identity that then they've not got an identity anymore. And people ask you, about your football, and then they don't ask you anymore about your football. So there's so much in it around developing enough soil, we call it soil, so that they've got enough emotional resilience to navigate through life and then performance. So that's kind of the breath work. We're part of it all the time.
Great. And Sally, you mentioned the vagus nerve. For anyone who doesn't know the vagus nerve, including me, where is it? What is it in your brain? Is it like where else?
Yeah, so there's two actually, but there's your vagus nerve sits in your brain, and it comes down and wraps around your nervous system, but it also is intertwined into your heart, your lungs, and your gut. So when people talk about trust your gut instinct, it's your vagus nerve that's picking up on threat out of your subconscious awareness, that's then telling your body whether you think something's nice or it's not. And that runs at the bottom of your gut. And this vagus nerve ties into your major organs, and like I said, is attached to all our nervous system. And our nervous system, we know, is 80% visceral. So whatever we feel goes to our brain, and whatever we think goes down into our body. And I use the theory of polyvagal theory, which is Stephen Porges' work, and that's what I've used to put into the football. And so the vagus nerve is really your superpower. And if you can understand about how you either strengthen it and stimulate it, and your vagus nerve will shut once you've been through a traumatic event, and how we then open it back up.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the best way of doing that? And a lot of cold water, humming, singing, things like this all start to really develop and strengthen his vagus nerve, breath work, yoga, mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
meditation, all connects in to your vagus nerve, and it really supports them what we need for them as a human being to navigate the field and navigate things off the field as well. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so if you googled vagus nerve, there's a lot of there's a really good book Anna Ferguson's done about vagus nerve reset,
Mm-hmm.
and the holistic psychologist that's probably think she's got three number one top sellers at the minute. She uses the vagus nerve as well in her work, and it's very much used in therapy, in medicine, in approaches, contemplative approaches. But obviously, that's where I've just been trying to bring it across into the football world and start to support the players, understanding what happens. And yeah, if you ask some of our boys at Sheffield, they'll be able to tell you a lot about the vagus nerve.
What kind of evidence have they given themselves on how it's changed their performance or way of being or responses to situations?
Yeah, it's I get that asked a lot about how do you know. So in my PhD, I interviewed staff and I've interviewed players. So it's very much experiential um, data that they're giving me. We've also been able to track on a few players just because of the technology that they've got, or if they've tracked the sleep through either a Aurora ring or a Whoop. And you've got what's called your heart rate variability. And your heart rate variability should, if you are developing your vagus nerve, should increase. So your window of tolerance increases basically. So your heart rate will probably go down, but your heart rate variability increases. So we've got a little bit of data
Mm-hmm.
on it. Without me having an fMRI scanner to scan the brains, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the boys want data, want facts, so they can look at it that way. But a lot of them, it's very experiential. It's very what they've noticed, what they've seen, how they've felt, and that's come through the data. And the same with the staff. So the staff got asked around what have you taken from it, but also have you noticed anything in other players? And they've done the same. And it's interesting that a couple of the players that have starting to come through are really starting now to blossom in the 21s and pushing through. Probably the players that have done the most of it. And so it's no coincidence now of the players that have moved through, coming through. Um, they've felt it, they've seen it, they'll understand it. And it's been interesting because one player I had for about a year, one season, and then moved to another club. He got a higher club move. And I interviewed him 18 months later for the PhD to basically say, has he carried on with it? Has it stuck? Has it impacted him? Does he still use it? And he has, which is great. And then I interviewed three professionals. So I interviewed somebody from the EFL, somebody from the FA, and somebody from the Premier League that comes into the club. And that was the same. What have you noticed? What have you seen? What's changed? What hasn't changed? What's your thoughts? So the data's quite strong, but it's very much experiential rather than actual factual data. But we have got some slight ones, yeah.
Interesting. And then, so those, if you've been able to see from those players that are actively practicing this
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
versus those that aren't, is it clear to you kind of why their journeys may be as they are? I mean, I know everyone's journey is different, but is it quite obvious, like those that are carrying on, those that are not?
Uh, yeah, for definite.
Mm,
And I think the ones that have had a real individual program, you can really see the benefits.
mm,
And I would say I left Sheffield beginning middle of March, um, and some of the messages that you get are I still meet one of our players every Wednesday for yoga. They all still do the yoga. And it's funny because I walked into the changing room, the 21 I'd left, and I walked into the changing room to see him after a semi final. And like, it wasn't like, hiya, Sally, you all right? Some of them did, but other of them were like, Sally, I need I need some more yoga. Can we do that? It's so they understand that it's part of the journey and part of their process. And if they have these habits, then the habits will help them then formulate some foundations. So the ones that have stuck with it, definitely. And it's interesting that you get to a point with them. For example, one of the players, you're guiding them so much to start with because they haven't got the skill set, and then you get to a point where you know that they've got everything they need now, and you kind of like back off,
Mm.
and they're just like you seem to just allow them to go and flow, and they've just played in a final, and like when the boys text me after his put, um, and the manager did something before the game with this certain player, and he ran past me, and I'm like, yeah, do it. And they understand it. That's the key.
Mm.
So like he texts me after saying the chat helped me regulate. The team helps him regulate. Um, and they start to understand how they're using it for
Mm.
performance. And it is actually like I went and watched the final and just sat there and watched them, and I'm thinking about which players you've done the most work with and who's come through and the journeys, and it is so like it is magical to see and to be a part of because you're just giving them the tools that then allows them to flourish,
Mm.
and they start to understand themselves, and that's kind of what the remit was. Your brain and your body don't settle down until the 24, 25. So if you can give them it at 16, 17, 18 in the most pivotal stage, then they've got all the things they need. You're not going to stop having life's ups and downs because it's life,
Mm.
but they've got the tools then to be able to navigate that.
Yeah, yeah. No, brilliant, brilliant. So again, let's take for example, you talked about visualization.
Mm.
How does that positively impact a young player's ability to maybe cope with some of the pressures of a game situation or something like that?
Yeah, so a couple of ways with visualization. So, for example, when we play away, so I work with the national team at the minute. When we play away, we always get the footage from the um, stadium a couple of weeks before, and we send the footage to the girls. So the fact that then they can see where they're going to be playing and they can use it for visualization. Your nervous system, when you have a new experience, gets you ready for threat. Your body's always looking for the threat internally, externally, and environmentally. So when we show them the stadium, then and they visualize themselves in it, your nervous system, when you get to that place, will go, "Oh, I've been here before. I'm fine." So it keeps it open. So you're not shut as much, which means when you're shut, you've got less capacity to regulate, make decisions, refocus, and focus. So from a cultural like and bodily state position, you can visualize yourself in a stadium and you can see it. And the more that details you've got, the better. So what you can visualize. But then, for example, you might visualize a behavioral thing or you might visualize a technical thing. So you've got it stored in your body. So for example, if a player's had a bad low move and come back in and low on confidence, which confidence is a word that gets branded around a lot, and it's basically what you think, feel in your body, and we can control that. Um, but if they had a bad, say for example, low move, come back in, and they're not, they normally play that takes players on and really creative and have loads of shots outside the box, but don't do that as much because their bodily state is not feeling it. Then we can start to look at right, get some footage when you did do it, watch yourself, sit self and visualize it, and you're just then stimulating that brain pattern back in. Your brain, as I've said before, doesn't know if you're thinking it or doing it. So you can really ingrain some behaviors or some technical stuff by doing it. The more you can focus on the detail around it, that's the key. So if you've got video footage and you're visualizing yourself, what colour kit you've got on, who's around you, all that side of it, then that helps to really ingrain that into your brain, into your nervous system. So there's a little bit of regulation things and there's more of them performance things.
Mm-hmm.
I put
Brilliant.
my battery. Sorry.
So, I mean, that's really interesting as well. And then you talked about yoga. And I
Yes.
know that, for example, the club that my son plays at, like the head of the academy was a former player, and he swears by, yoga extending his playing career. And there seems to be evidence out there, if you look for it, that yoga, is an amazing thing to start practicing when you're in that football
Yeah.
setting. Tell me more about that. Why is it, a good holistic introduction into football?
Yeah, so it's interesting the way that yoga gets presented, I think, in clubs sometimes. It gets presented as a recovery tool. So flexibility and movement and whatever, which it is. It is a beneficial. From my lens and for what is when you're doing yoga, you are moving with your breath work in your body. So you can feel the breath in your body and you're moving with it. When we have trauma stored in our body and our brain, yoga helps us to move that trauma around. So it's the mind and body connection. When you're in a class, you're more stimulating your vagus nerve. So it comes back to your vagus nerve. So polyvagal theory is very highly linked to yoga.
Mm-hmm.
So it's around how you feel, how you work with your breath, how you move around in your body, sensing in, which is key for us. But also there's the added benefits of the flexibility and the movement that does help to support. Also, for me, massively linked to sleep
Mm-hmm.
because if you're doing yoga and you're down regulating, then you can change and you can relax. Then later on, it can be benefit of sleep. So we know what we sleep very much around what you do through the day will affect your sleep at night. So yoga, for me, just getting an hour on the mat, 20 minutes on the mat, is really key for the players. In fact, I'm taking one player to yoga tomorrow, and he'll have done 2 sessions in the day with like fitness, and then gonna come and do some yoga with me. So there's a different types of yoga, but I think when I explain it to the boys around this is why we're doing it, and there's always players that do. So, for example, Ronaldo does a lot of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Haaland does a lot of meditation. You've got Djokovic that does a lot of meditation. You've got Phelps that does a lot of visualization, Wayne Rooney. So you can bring out a lot of people that sports people that do a lot of this work. But what we've done with the boys, we made them. They had to do the yoga. It were in the program. Some of them then like to do extra, or the breath work, the visualization, all that side of it was them basically is their tools. So
Mm-hmm.
what works for them? So what do they like? What do they bring in? Journaling, things like that. So we exposed them to it all, but then it were all very much individual based. What do you want to get out of it? So yeah, so the yoga though for me was so beneficial that I wanted them all to do it for them, not just for them as a performer, but for as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we really start to develop that emotional resilience in them? And the research linking it to the polyvagal theory shows that yoga is probably one of the ones that we can hit them from a human being perspective without them really knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it also links back into the recovery program as well for them. So yeah, so yoga were a big key for us.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like because we actually interviewed a lady called Sharon Hygiapour, and
Yes,
she does football yoga. We interviewed her, and again, she explained the amazing benefits of it. So it's sometimes surprising, like why it's not a part of the standard curriculum. That's a part of the development of young people in
yeah.
club.
I think I think it comes back to this change in the lens and actually understanding. So MDTs will probably put it in from a recovery program.
What's MDT? Sorry.
Multidisciplinary team. So, like the S&C will probably bring it in from a recovery program. But unless you've got somebody that's gives you the science behind it or how it links
Mm.
to performance, we tend to just keep on going what we've always done. And I think that's the big key for me is, if you went to Oxford or Cambridge, you get educated probably by Oxford or Cambridge people. So it's just the system. And we have a lot of coaches that work, especially in the PDP, that have played and come through the same system. So we just repeat. Whereas when you start putting a different lens on it and actually explaining why you do it and what this helps from as a person and then a performer and how it
Mm.
links back into the football, you start to get some buy-in. But you've got to have influence. And so from the S&C side, if they feel like there's value, but then the kind of manager don't see where it all links in and that they can be doing another hour of football, then you're not going to get the buy-in. But if you can explain how you get the benefit, and it can just be 20 minutes, and it gets presented the right way to the players, I think that's the key. So we've had a couple of the girls come on to international camp, and they're like, yoga, because it's got delivered in a different way back into the clubs,
Mm.
and they've not enjoyed it and they've been forced to do it. Whereas we did it 20 minutes in the program, it was done differently. The boys knew how it linked in, the staff knew how it linked in. So it's definitely got to be framed right for
Mm.
definite. And but there's massive benefits, but you've got to have the right people with the open mind to then embrace it and reinforce it, but also as a negotiation tool for me, I could always back it up by the science,
Yeah.
which I think is the key. Like they want to know the why. Our
Yes.
young people want to know why, which is great. So long as you can back it up by the science and it ties into the program, I think that's what were the key.
Brilliant. So you mentioned like the girls doing it, and so tell me about it. Are you finding there's a different appetite for this work in general across the boys and the girls, or are they all sort of, in your experience, sort of accepting it in an equal way, or do their minds
Yeah.
work very differently? And
No, I think accepting it in an equal way. I think it's the way it's worked differently is because when you're in a club every day, you're in the club every day. When I'm on camp, I only see them for a certain amount when we go back. So how I work it, how it's being delivered is different, slightly. But no, they have have not really been met with much challenge to it because when you explain it, especially to the staff, they'll go, "Oh my god, is that why I felt this when I played here, or I experienced that?" And then they'll go, then you can start to talk about it, which then them understand it.
Mm.
So you've not really got much challenge, but what we have had, especially the women, the girls' side, because the game isn't as further forward. And unless you work in a boys' academy, you can't access the Advanced Youth Award because it's funded by the Premier League. So a lot of the coaches that work in the women's game have not accessed the Advanced Youth Award, which means they've not got exposed to the psych and social elements as much. So when I were working with the girls, and everybody values psychology in clubs, and I'm not a psychologist, never claimed to be, and I'm not a neuroscientist, very much football background. But when the girls were going back into their clubs, they might have had a very inexperienced psych, or the money isn't put in the psych provision, or the coach is not as upskilled in it. So when the girls then started to really understand that this what I spoke to them about, the neuroscience and these are the tools, quite a few of them went back and kind of now started challenging in a healthy way what was provided. So I got quite a few of the clubs messaging me saying, "Can I come
What
and
you
see
talking
what
about?
see what you're doing?" Because the girls have come back off camp and like started to challenge a little bit.
Mm. Good.
So sports psychology is theoretical based. The girls, some of them were like, "Well, it's not working for me." So I've not really had the girls. The approach of the boys and the girls has been same, open armed with it and welcomed it in. I think the girls have started to challenge more of what's provided back in the clubs because the provision is not as strong at the minute back in their clubs compared to what it is in the boys' academy with what is provided in the boys' academy.
Right. No, really interesting actually. So Sally, I want to kind of bring this to the parent space
Yeah,
now. This is great when it's also, it can be supported by the club, but when our kids are back home with us and also some of the anxieties and pressures that we feel as
yeah,
parents, how can this work practically help us? Can you give us some sort of scenarios where, you know, breath will help us, I don't know, in the car journey home, the
yeah.
conversation or visualize, how can we as parents use it for ourselves?
I think the best, uh, what we've found is once the parents start to understand themselves and start to understand these tools and show that they use them, it starts to influence a little bit more as well with the boys or with the girls or with their child. Um, Research shows us that car journeys is the most stressful part of a footballing journey. So how we are in ourselves and our regulation will influence their regulation. So we
Mm,
know what's called neuroception. Neuroception is how our body picks up on this threat. So when I'm regulated, my child that sat at the side of me will be able to be regulated. If I talk around my breath work, then it's a tool that they'll pick up on. And for me to regulate myself might be breath work. Also, language is really key. There's a book called Words Can Change Your Brain. And once you start looking at the power of a language, it's massive. So we talk about what if thinking. When you
mm,
are going into what if thinking, then it produces certain chemicals in our brain. But if we use an and or a yet and we catch where we start to change that mindset with it, within the children, it helps. I would always say that I would try to put the onus on them in the car. So, is there anything you want to talk about? And if they don't want to talk about it, I'd leave it. They will then at some point come back to it if they want to. And then there's the questions around, when we're going to this game today, how would you like me to be in this car with you? So do you want
mm,
some music on? Do you want me to ask you about the game? So there's some real good kind of conversation starters and also ways of being. But I think the biggest thing is around understanding our regulation really impacts theirs. So
mm,
even on the sidelines, if I start getting irate, their nervous system will pick up on the voices. So they'll pick up on voices. Our threat detection's from our eyes to our mouth. So if we starts being our body language and our face and our tone starts to change on the sidelines, it will affect their nervous system. Simple as that. And everything is built on our bodily state. So our decision making, our confidence, our self esteem, our endurance, our physical output, our technical output is all built on bodily state. So how we are as adults will help with their bodily state because we can co-regulate with them and we can either influence that and be a trigger or we can really support and be some glimmers and give them glimmers which helps their nervous system. And I
mm,
think that's the big thing. um, Language, tone, and our own bodily awareness. And also giving them a little bit of a what do you want from me today question.
mm,
Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to leave it? What do you want me to focus on in the game? Or do you want what should we have the music on? Do we want it calm? Do you want it quiet? Some people like the music, so music's brilliant for stimulation and regulation. Some like it high, some like it low. So, what's the songs that you want us to play today? So, there's like a kind of a support network and a process because the car journey is a really important element of the day.
mm,
And if they've been at school, for example, and then they've gone to training and they're late getting back and then have a bad training session and then the car journey is not as probably is productive as probably what it can be. Sleep's impacted, they're going through massive brain changes at youth development phase, all becomes a vicious circle.
mm.
So it's the car journeys are proven to be quite a high stressful situation for many players.
Yeah, and I can imagine. I often recount that when Mars was doing his 11 plus, we were
Yeah,
on our way to a game, no, to a training, and he was having an exam the next day, and I, still took him to training. But I remember I cut out a volume, I cut out a cube, And in the car, I said, okay, work out the volume of this cube. And he was like, what? And I was like, come on, we've got an exam tomorrow. And I was just like, I was so kind of stressed. The
No.
poor kid, I was a bit mental in that situation. But he even counts it now like, Mum, you were a lunatic, like at
Yeah.
that in that moment, and it couldn't have helped for him going to training that night and performing.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, every now and again, kind of got to check yourself, haven't you? Really, and
Yeah.
see the impact that has.
Yeah, no, it does. It stores. So every experience we have stores in our body and brain, and a negative gets stored more. So it's, but there's also a caveat that we're all human, aren't we? And we get
Mm,
things wrong sometimes, and that's fine. And 30% of regulated and meeting their needs and all like that is really
mm,
good for human development. So, but car journeys is really something that um, is hard to navigate.
mm,
Um, but really key as well, because a lot happens when you are in a car. You're more calm because you've got containment anyway.
mm,
So it can be a really productive place and to
mm,
be, and use in their development and how they feel and emotions and all like that. So yeah, it's we used to get a book, and there were, I think it was 12, it's 20 conversations for car journeys, and we had them in the parents' room, and you could take them home and then bring them back.
oh wow,
So yeah,
I must get some of those titles. That'd be really handy to put in our
yes,
book club.
yeah,
Um, so Sally, then the other thing I wanted to sort of have a conversation about was around fear, just
yeah,
general fear. Our kids are feeling fear perhaps when they're going to school, or they're going to shoot or take a penalty, or it's their first time playing in a match. Maybe they're a trialist. Talk about some of the work that you do that kind of helps with fear. Some practical things we can share with our kids.
yeah. So same really what we've spoke about, but fear's part of our brainstem, and we've got like 7 different areas, 7 circuits in his brain, and fear's one of them. So fear does control a lot, and I think we spoke about it. And Pippa Grange, amazing psychologist, done loads of work on how you feel less rather than being fearless, because you can't get rid of it. It's something that is there for us to protect us. So, and I think it comes back to really understanding again about it's normal. This is
Mm,
your body's way of keeping you safe. How you then experience it and you express it is the key. And I think that's probably what we got around in the culture bit around emotions and feelings are normal. It's a continuum. There's no bad and good. It gets labeled as bad and good, but they're not. It's just on the continuum. And to experience anxiety, you've got to experience love. And you
mm,
want that, be able to experience it. How you frame it in language, excuse me, is then key.
mm,
And talking about it is key. But I'm understanding that this is normal. This is how your body and your brain works. And when you're
mm,
going into this situation that is new, that is a cup final or your exams or whatever, then this is your body's way of keeping you safe.
mm,
But what we need to understand is if you understand it and then you've got them tools, you then use your tools. You can't get rid of it. We need it in case bus is going to come flying at
mm,
us, or we're in a classroom or something, and plane's going to be coming into the classroom. It's what keeps us safe,
mm,
and understanding that that is normal, and also the fact of when you use it, it's a really good chemical response. So if you use it and understand it and can feel it and work with it, then you've got a really good advantage.
mm,
If you allow it and to control you with it, then that's where we tip. So
mm,
we talked around at Sheffield about red zone and green zone, and if you're in your red zone and this fear is consuming you, you'll feel it in your body, or you'll not feel it. You'll feel numb, but that's where decision making, planning, predicting, non-verbal communication becomes very limited. Whereas if you're in the green zone and you're working with this I understand that this is an element I'm going to feel today because of the volume of the game or how I think. And you can align them into your, I call you butterflies, align them, then you can fly with them. And
Mm.
that's what really is key. It's the knowledge and understanding about it. And it really, then the tools that you work with it, because you can't get rid of it.
Mm.
You've got to understand it to then work with it. And it can be really beneficial if you can work with it. Massively
Mm.
beneficial. Um,
Mm.
and you will have them experiences because people want to do well. They are
Mhm.
in a high pressure sport.
Mhm.
But understanding it and all the things of it off the field we've talked about around developing their soil allows them then when they come into that situation to not feel the fear as much, to embrace it and to work with it, and
Mm.
also then enjoy the experiences that they're getting. So I think
Mhm.
that's a couple of the interviews with some of our boys that's gone into the first team and playing a lot in the first team. Their language around them um, viewing it differently and experiencing it and enjoying it and being present and working with it really came out.
Mm.
And I think that's what you get when you're doing the off field things with the on field things and the cultures there. We
Mm.
start to embrace it more than fear it and we
Mm.
work with it. And it's interesting that one of the coaches said to me, "You've helped me view a game that I used to fear so different."
Mm.
Um, and it's understanding that this is normal, but
Mm.
you've got to
Mm.
understand it to be able to work with it.
Sure. And is that a different type of fear than, for example, parent on the sideline? You're watching your kid making a mistake that you think, either is catastrophic in the sense that it's, killed the game off, or they haven't played that well, so you're worried about, the ramifications of them in the next
Yeah.
game or their coach. Is that a different kind of fear that we're sort of like we're worried about what's happening in this environment with our kids?
Yeah, it probably goes more into what if thinking. You probably what if. So you start thinking about the consequences or the outcomes of what's going off rather than actually in the present. Once we're in the present, then and we're not in the what if thinking. The what if thinking is red zone thinking.
Mm.
So
Okay.
you start, like you said, catastrophizing or what if this is going to happen or what's going to happen next week or what's going to now happen with this selection and once we start moving into there, we're flooding our body with these chemicals.
Mm.
Whereas if we stay in the present, it's better. But I think there's all different types of how we experience things. And as well, we have to sometimes wonder or kind of be curious around like why am I thinking and feeling that around this situation? Because it's probably something that triggers in us. The player or the child sometimes might not have that approach, might be looking into that totally different lens because their experiences are different.
Mm.
So I think they'll have, we've also got probably a little bit of like fear sometimes or that element of status, identity. We've talked about it, you lose your identity or people want to talk to you about the football. And if you come away from that or deselection and social media these days and all like that, there's elements of that probably that comes through as well. So I think fear is a strong word. I think everybody will experience things differently and see things differently. I think for me, definitely catching ourselves and our thought process because it all will impact then our bodily state, which then influences their bodily state,
Mm.
which then, if they've had a bad game, if you want to place it as a bad game, if they have it that way, then and it's around perspective. And I
Mm.
think in football, working in football, people go very much on the game and they look at the game and they look at the stats, but it's a bigger process when you're taking things into consideration. And actually, I view getting having a mistake and then going and getting back on the ball and trying to keep making the mistake. That's a really strong quality.
Mm.
Um, so it's interesting how you view it. I don't know if you really answered your question there, but
Yeah. No, no, very helpful. We all need a Sally Needham in our little back pocket, I think. We can hang you on the dashboard of our car. A little voice note helping us along the way. No, that's really fascinating. Um, Sally, there's loads I obviously would love to talk to you about, but
Yeah.
we're going to have you back on and sort of home in on some other things. But just as a final message, I guess,
Yeah.
around the work that you do and maybe how it's influencing the industry, or what you'd want from the industry, I guess, to sort of embrace this, the new science, neuroscience
Yeah.
way of thinking. What would that be?
Um, I think what you said earlier around academies. So for me, giving putting the neuroscience onto the coach education system would be key, but also really challenging systems that we've already got in place. So, like you said earlier, like the yoga, like giving people the understanding of this is what happens in yoga, this is what happens to your body and your brain, this is what then you get from performance. I think from me, the definitely the in trying to more embed it in the academies and get the work out there. Um, and it's really more I get the performance element and I understand it and I know the key. The off the pitch stuff for me is where it's so beneficial because you're impacting society realistically. Um, because if they feel better and they've got more emotional resilience, the performance will take care of itself. But and I think that's where I would like more clubs to really look at it differently and look at the neuroscience. But like we said, it's not been transferred yet. This is probably the first bit of work with FC Copenhagen that's transferred it. There's more people going out there a little bit more and starting to really be curious around it. And there's loads of other work that's been done that's brilliant from a sports psych perspective. But I think the key for me would be the starting to embed the work more in academies, and
Yeah.
especially the mindfulness area. The down regulation stuff that's off the field really is the key. And looking at things differently, So there's probably just a minute in talks with another club around how they're going to might structure some things, and they're going to try and go it a bit different. So not just what we've always done, but that's going to actually probably need a bit of a change in the EPPP as well that governs the academy system. But yeah,
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but for me, the embracing of more of the human development stuff, so the yoga, the breath work, cold water, all that side of it that they have off the field, because the football will take care of itself then.
Yeah, brilliant. No, honestly, I love it. This area is all sort of new thinking and being, and I would love to see it in those younger age groups and families to sort of start to understand it as
Yeah.
well and to support their kids. Sally, you're amazing. Learned so much. I'm sure our parents and guardians on our platform would as well. Thank you so much for your time on the Real Sideline Expert. Thank you,
No
Sally.
problem. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for asking me.
Pleasure. Thank you.